After rescuing a lion cub, a man finds himself surrounded by a pride, and what happens next is beyond belief. The swift, muddy waters of the Mara River surged around David Thompson's torso as he battled the powerful current, the soaked lion cub clinging tightly to his shoulders. Just moments earlier, the 34-year-old wildlife photographer had been adjusting his camera gear on the riverbank when he witnessed something that would forever alter the course of his life. A tiny cub swept into the flooded river, carried off by rising waters from the previous night's storm. David had spent the past 8 years photographing the animals in Kenya's Masai Mara. He had always obeyed the golden rule of wildlife photography: never interfere with nature. But that rule shattered the instant he saw the helpless cub. No more than 4 months old, the cub had wandered too close to the river's edge when the soft ground gave way, sending him tumbling into the rapids. His panicked cries as he was pulled away shattered David's composure. Without a second thought, he dropped his camera and dove in. "I couldn't just stand there and watch," David would later explain. "Everything human in me overrode everything professional." The rescue nearly cost him his life. During the rainy season, the Mara River becomes a deadly force, filled with hidden snags, jagged rocks, and shifting currents that have drowned both animals and people. As David pushed through the surging water to reach the cub, a submerged branch smashed into his shoulder, nearly knocking him out. But his focus never wavered. The cub, nearly unconscious from swallowed water and fear, clung to David with surprising strength, its tiny paws wrapped around his neck. David could feel the rapid, frantic beat of the young lion's heart against his own as he fought against the relentless flow pulling them toward crocodile-infested waters downstream. Unbeknownst to David, he was not alone. Hidden among the acacia trees lining the riverbank, 5 lionesses had been tracking the calls of their missing cub. The pride had followed his scent trail to the water, arriving just in time to see the man battling the river to save him. As David finally reached the shallows, breathless and exhausted, he looked up and froze. The entire pride stood watching him, not only the 5 lionesses, but also a huge dark-maned male. They were motionless, forming a silent arc along the edge of the water, their golden eyes fixed on David and the cub in his arms. His thoughts scrambled. There was no escape. He was standing chest-deep in the river, holding a lion cub, with 6 adult lions blocking his only way out. Any sudden move could trigger an attack that would be over in an instant. The largest lioness, clearly the matriarch, stepped toward the river. David braced himself, preparing for the worst. Lions are known to be fiercely protective of their young, and here he was, a human, carrying one. Everything David had ever learned told him this moment would end in blood. But what happened next defied all expectations and scientific understanding of lion behavior. The lioness's gaze wasn't one of hostility. Instead, David saw something in her eyes he had never encountered in all his years, photographing predators in the wild, recognition, and what looked like gratitude. The cub began to cry softly, calling to the pride. The sound broke the heavy silence. David's waterproof action camera, still recording from his harness, would later capture what followed. The matriarch stepped into the water, her paws sending ripples across the surface, drawing nearer to the man who held her cub. David tensed for an attack that never came. Just 3 feet away, the lioness stopped, and slowly she bowed her massive head in a gesture no one could explain. The gesture extended for what felt like an eternity. During those silent seconds, the entire pride remained frozen. No twitch of a tail, no shift in posture, as if they were bearing witness to a moment steeped in instinctual reverence. It was more than observation. It was participation in something profound. When the matriarch finally lifted her head, her amber gaze locked with David's, not in challenge, not in suspicion, but with startling clarity. It was not the look of a predator evaluating a threat. It was a quiet, composed gaze of acknowledgement. A silent understanding passed between them, ancient and unspoken. The cub in David's arms stirred again, mewling with renewed hope, his tiny paws stretching toward his mother. In response, the matriarch made soft, rhythmic chuffing noises, comforting, maternal sounds used by lionesses during nursing, bonding, and reassurance. "It's okay now. Your family's here," David whispered to the cub, his voice barely audible beneath the ceaseless rush of the river. The moment felt suspended in time, as if responding not just to his voice but to the safety and love it carried. The matriarch moved a step closer. David's pulse thudded in his ears, but the lioness's demeanor was unmistakably calm. Her movements were slow, measured, without tension. Her golden eyes held something remarkable: intent, intelligence, even empathy. What occurred next would leave biologists and ethologists astounded for decades. The matriarch extended her immense head until David could feel her breath on his wet skin. Her eyes studied him, not as an object or a threat, but as something worthy of deep consideration. In that moment, she wasn't just an animal. She was a sovereign being assessing the man before her. And then she acted in a way no human had ever documented in the wild. Her great head bowed slightly, and her tongue, rough as sandpaper, warm as the savannah sun, touched David's forehead in a deliberate, gentle stroke. It was not random. It was grooming. It was family behavior. She was welcoming him, even if briefly, into the sacred inner circle of the pride. David remained utterly still. A single breath, a flinch, could shatter the moment. Every fiber of his being, honed by years of patience behind the lens, understood the magnitude of this gift. For those 30 surreal seconds, he was not just a witness to nature, he was part of it. The matriarch had made her choice. She trusted him, and the rest of the pride followed her lead. Slowly, silently, the lionesses moved forward, no longer wary or aggressive. Their tails relaxed, their shoulders loose. There was no stalking, no tension in their steps. The massive male, majestic, powerful, a lion in the prime of his strength, rose from his position under the tree. With graceful authority, he walked to the riverbank and lowered himself into a regal seated position, eyes soft, posture neutral. David knew enough to recognize this for what it was: a sign of peace, of trust, of unity. With the cub still nestled in his arms, he began his slow journey back to solid ground. Not one lion moved to stop him. Quite the opposite. They parted, forming an arc, a silent corridor of acceptance. It was not a trap. It was a procession, an act of honor. When David reached the edge of the river, he sank to his knees in the mud, lowering the cub with infinite care. The reunion was instantaneous. The matriarch surged forward, not with aggression, but with overwhelming maternal urgency. She nuzzled and sniffed her cub from head to tail, issuing soft, rapid purrs and chuffs as she checked him over. Her relief was palpable, visible in every touch. The other lionesses soon joined her, forming a gentle huddle. Each lioness took a moment to examine the cub, to reaffirm the bond of kinship through scent and touch. Then came the male. Towering and magnificent, he approached last. With a tenderness few would believe possible from such a powerful beast, he lowered his head and touched his nose to the cub's flank, his own form of approval. David remained on the riverbank, water streaming from his clothes, utterly silent. Surrounded by 6 of Africa's apex predators, he should have been paralyzed with fear. But he wasn't. What he felt instead was something near to reverence. In that moment, he was not an intruder, not a rescuer, not even a photographer. He was a man granted entrance into a sacred, ancient bond, one that transcended species. It was a moment few, if any, humans had ever been allowed to witness. Not just lions as predators, but as parents, as siblings, as a family. When Dr. Sarah Mbeki, a leading expert in large carnivore behavior, reviewed David's camera footage weeks later, she could barely believe what she saw. That grooming act, that was not instinct. That was decision, she explained in a press interview. Grooming is reserved for pride members, mates, cubs, bonded relatives. For a lioness to extend that to a human suggests not just social cognition, but emotional processing. It implies recognition, possibly even gratitude. This challenges the very limits of what we believe lions are capable of in terms of empathy, memory, and decision-making. Scientists debated the event for months, citing the footage in research papers and documentaries. As the pride began to settle around their recovered cub, lying together in the golden light of late afternoon, David took the opportunity to step back. He moved slowly, cautiously, hoping to give the lions space and avoid disturbing their peace. But as he turned to leave, the matriarch once again lifted her head. From deep within her chest came a sound David had never heard, not a roar, not a warning, but a low, musical rumble, almost like a spoken phrase in a language he did not know. The other lions immediately responded, rising to their feet with calm precision. They didn't block his path. Instead, they formed into two parallel lines stretching from where David stood to the base of the acacia tree, where his camera lay forgotten. It was unmistakable. A formation of protection, a corridor of farewell, a final act of acknowledgement from one species to another. Not prey, not threat, something else entirely. Safe passage. Away from the river, David whispered, his voice fragile, barely held together by awe. The words were captured by the still-recording waterproof microphone strapped to his chest, the same device that had silently documented every moment of this unincredible, almost mythical encounter. "They're seeing me out," he said again, this time more to himself than to the world. It sounded unbelievable, even to his own ears. Yet there it was, the truth laid bare before him, in the steady, deliberate movements of 6 full-grown lions who had chosen not to kill him, not to fear him, but to protect him. The matriarch took position at his right flank, her presence steadying. On his left moved the massive male lion, every step a study in grace and power. The other lionesses aligned themselves around him with remarkable symmetry. What they formed wasn't random. It was ceremonial, intentional. A silent act of reverence and purpose. David walked at the center of this living corridor of muscle, fur, and instinct, every footfall sinking slightly into the river-wet earth. His heartbeat, still ragged from adrenaline, began to slow, not out of relaxation, but out of reverence. He wasn't just walking with lions, he was being honored by them. All told, he was surrounded by over 1,500 pounds of apex predators, animals capable of ending his life in a flash of claws and teeth. But none of them even twitched in aggression. The only sounds were the soft rustling of grass beneath their feet, the distant gurgle of the Mara River behind them, and the occasional high-pitched chirp from the young cub trotting just ahead. The cub, recovered enough to walk on his own, moved between his mother and David with ease. Every few paces, he would glance back up at David, not with fear or hesitation, but with wide-eyed curiosity, even familiarity. Twice he brushed against David's leg with his small frame. The contact was brief but deliberate. It was a gesture of trust, a memory encoded into muscle and scent. As the unusual procession approached the acacia tree where David's equipment still lay, untouched and half-submerged in the trampled grass, the pride began to slow. The pace of the walk, so exact, so symbolic, came to a natural end. Without a word or signal, the lions stopped. The matriarch stepped forward. She turned to face David one last time. He stood frozen, soaked, aching, every nerve alive and alert. She looked at him, not with the eyes of a beast, but with the gaze of something ancient, knowing, aware. She tilted her massive head slightly to the side, studying him as if to imprint this moment into memory. Then, with stunning gentleness, she stepped close and pressed her broad, fur-covered forehead against his. It was a gesture no wildlife guide could explain, no textbook could define. It was how lions greet those they accept into their inner circle. A gesture of deep, mutual trust. "Thank you," David whispered, voice trembling. "Thank you for trusting me." He didn't expect a reply, but he received one anyway. The lioness let out a low, breathy chuff, a sound that carried more weight than any roar. It was a vocalization of comfort, of peace. She was not just saying goodbye, she was saying, "I see you." Then, one by one, the other lions followed her lead. Each approached David in turn, closing the invisible distance between them and this strange bipedal creature who had risked his life for one of their own. One brushed her shoulder along his leg, another touched her nose to his hand. Even the powerful male, his golden mane catching the dappled light through the trees, approached with slow, deliberate confidence. He leaned in and gently bumped his enormous head against David's shoulder, the weight of it staggering. There was no challenge in the act, only acceptance. David stood motionless, overcome, unsure if he was dreaming or waking into some new, wider truth. The cub he rescued grew into a powerful adult lion, taller and broader than most of his age. David continued to work in the Masai Mara, though nothing he captured on camera ever compared to that day. Over the following months, he encountered the pride several times. Each time, the matriarch greeted him with a familiar chuff. The young lion, now full-grown and radiant with strength, would approach David's vehicle, sometimes resting in its shade during the hottest part of the day. Never once did he show aggression, only recognition. Local Masai guides began calling him Nduguya Simba, Simba's brother. Tour companies marketed David Thompson encounters, though none of them ever recreated the magic of that afternoon by the Mara. Because what happened was not a performance, it was a moment of connection, a crack in the wall separating man and nature. Dr. Sarah Mbeki went on to found the Thompson Mara Research Foundation, dedicated to studying emotional cognition and interspecies relationships. In her now famous paper, Lions Remember, she wrote, "What we witnessed was not simply instinctual behavior. It was moral behavior, driven by emotional memory, empathy, and what appears to be an understanding of moral debt. Gratitude, honor, trust. These are not uniquely human. They are shared." Her work, backed by footage and first-hand accounts, would go on to influence global wildlife policy, conservation education, and even the field of animal rights. For David, who began that day only hoping to take a few good shots of lions in the wild, the experience became something far greater. It was a personal awakening, a lesson in humility, a moment that reaffirmed a truth too often forgotten in modern life. Compassion is a language deeper than words. It is a primal, universal force, understood not only by humans, but by the wild world we so often believe we stand apart from. In the end, he didn't just save a cub. He became a brother to a pride. And the wild remembered.